Let me share with you a brief intellectual history of just the terms, or it's more maybe a history of the labels of wake up, grow up, show up, lighten up, and open up. So the wake up, grow up distinction is sourced originally in John Welwood's book, A Psychology of Awakening, and I thank Sally Kempton for the reference, where John, who I've just had a couple of really delightful conversations with, really develops this and makes this split between the spiritual line of development, which is the line of, or particularly between the awakening dimension of the spiritual line of development, waking up in classical Buddhist terms, because John is an active Buddhist teacher and practitioner, so waking up is for him to wake up to classical true self, no self enlightenment, and growing up, which is doing the psychological work at wherever you are in the world. Whether you're awake, not awake, it's the psychological work you have to do, right? That psychological maturation, that's growing up. So there's waking up and growing up. Now, that's one. Two, John's teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, the founder of Naropa University, when he would talk about the Om Mani Padme Hum teaching in Buddhism, which is the jewel in the lotus teaching mantra, he would say the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, grow up. So Om Mani Padme Hum, in some sense, right, this jewel in the lotus means wake up. Right? This is the wake up call. That's the wake up teaching. So in essence, right, Trungpa was saying, Om Mani Padme Hum, grow up. So really, you can really source in some sense, and I shared this with John in a discussion a few months back, you can really source this wake up, grow up in Trungpa's insight coming from the East that one needs to do the wake up enlightenment work in the classical sense, but also the grow up work, which is the psychological integration maturation work. There's two really different lines of development. The mother of my son and dear close friend Mariana Kaplan, right, is in some sense a protege of John Welwood, right, and pointed out this Trungpa source in her book, and really does real work on working with people in these two different lines of development, this wake up and grow up line. 3, Ken Wilber was also Ken is a colleague of John's. In their 30s, they were colleagues and friends. Ken, either in discussion with John or independently, right, really came to this, profound understanding. Either they came to it contemporaneously, separately, together, influenced each other, who knows, right? But, Ken also really moved into this distinction of wake up and grow up and deployed this distinction very extensively. You have to wake up and you have to grow up. And Ken uses it slightly differently. He uses wake up in a very similar sense to John, but Ken uses grow up to refer specifically to levels of consciousness. While John is talking about psychological maturity at any level of consciousness, Ken is talking about growing up to higher and higher levels of consciousness. So that's the wake up, grow up distinction. Now, of course, levels of consciousness per se, developmental levels, right, is all of developmental theory, right? Awakening as enlightenment is all of the great traditions. So we're taking the great traditions and developmental theory, right, and we're calling them wake up and grow up, right? We're taking the developmental traditions and psychological theory and calling it wake up and grow up. That's the beginning of the terms. That's their origin. Now, in Kabbalah, which is my source tradition, that distinction is made very, very extensively. And there's a whole set of practices one needs to do to grow up, which means psychological maturity, right? And to wake up, which means to wake up to enlightenment. That's the beginning of the story. Then, what happens next is, which is kind of very interesting, is Dustin DePerna made a wonderful suggestion, right, to me, and to Ken, which was let's add in, a couple of terms, just we'll have a more complete set of terms, right? And so Dustin suggested, right, in the context of integral religion, right, let's add in, show up, and Dustin used the word clean up to refer to shadow, or open up. So Dustin suggested creating, having a kind of labeled cluster of terms. I shifted the terms, clean up to lighten up, because lighten up has a whole set of different implications. I like the word better as a label. And really what we're talking about is about the best label. We're not really talking about content here. We're talking what's the best way to label this. And of course, shifted the meaning. And its open up became for me about love and about the teaching I've developed on 3 stations of love and the teaching on 3 meanings of love and then the 3 faces of love. Right? Those 3 teachings, 2 of which I developed, and the third really is emergent from both the great traditions and integral theory. So open up really became understandable in light of these love teachings. And of course, show up was all about the unique self teaching, right, which I've spent my lifetime delightedly developing, right? And lighten up was about a very specific teaching, which I've developed in the unique self work on following your unique shadow, identifying the fact that there is a unique shadow, and following it back to your unique self. So this cluster of terms, underwent a transformation in meaning, right, in terms of the unique self teaching. So show up became showing up as your unique self. Wake up, waking up to your true unique self. Grow up, growing up to the higher levels of developmental consciousness in which your unique self expresses itself spontaneously. Right? Lighten up, following your unique shadow back to your unique self. And finally, open up, right, is open up, right, at these 3 trinities of love, 3 stations of love, 3 faces of love, and 3 meanings of love. And all of these meanings are in some sense or another connected to unique self, which I won't go through now, but for example, love is a unique self-perception, right, in the second person. You show up, right, as love, right, as your unique self, but you also open up as love in all 3 persons as unique self. You open up as a unique expression of love intelligence in the third person. You be love in the world uniquely, and you perceive, right, through your unique self-perception. So all of these have been recast, right, in terms of, right, a merger between integral theory, right, and unique self. So lots of people contributed to this. My work in unique self theory is one, significant piece of it. John Wellward's initial set of intuitions and contributions, Ken Wilber's, enormous opus of integral theory and his usage of wake up and grow up, Dustin's suggesting of the cluster of terms, right, Mariana's, right, sourcing, right, and Trungpa, all contributed. And now we're using, right, kind of this 5-part schematic, right, as a simple way of delivering a formulation of unique self in the world, a formulation of world spirituality in the world, of developing a kind of overall world spirituality teaching in a way that there's a simple way to kind of access it. Wake up, grow up, show up, lighten up, open up. And that's important because world spirituality teaching has to have amplitude. What I mean by amplitude is you have to be able, the nature of a great teaching, the nature of a great tradition, right, is that you can access it on all different levels of consciousness, all different levels of sophistication. So you can be a kind of popular Buddhist, right, doing particular kinds of prostration to an idol, and you can be a Buddhist who's all about pure emptiness, and you're both practicing Buddhism. Judaism, Christianity, right, they're all experienced at different levels of consciousness. And it's critical to have, right, a very, very kind of elegant, simple formula to create a kind of Steve Jobs interface, Apple interface of spirit with culture. And to kind of this Steve Jobs Apple interface that we've developed from these different sources that I've pointed out, right, is the interface of world spirituality app, right, with public culture. So I hope that gives you a sense of where these terms came from. Thank you.